It's just starting. Hold on a sec.
Sure. It says recording up at the top. I don't know if that means anything.
Oh, good morning. I'm with Jonathan Baumgart from Atomiq Consulting. Today we are going to be discussing regulation around the crypto space. A lot of people are looking to enter that marketplace. There's a lot of new exchanges appearing, etc. As many of you know, I'm very interested in regulation, and I believe that the crypto space will only evolve if it regulates in the correct way. Jonathan is an expert at regulation, so I thought it'd be interesting to get him onto the channel, have a chat with him about his thoughts on regulation in the crypto space, and go from there. I suppose best place to start, Jonathan, is tell everybody a bit about your background and what you do now.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Chris. I appreciate the invitation and having me on today. So yeah, I'm Jonathan Baumgart, the CEO of Atomiq Consulting. Briefly, I started the firm in 2014. I began doing IT work and offering different solutions in the FX space, helping people start brokers. And we changed gears a bit around the time of ESMA, where there was a lot of demand on the licensing side due to changes in regulation. And that's really where we carved out a niche for ourselves. And around this period, I would say crypto still wasn't mainstream. But since, let's say, about 2018, when we started seeing a lot of volatility, and especially during the pandemic, crypto has become the talk on everyone's mind, both good and bad, as it's gone through crazy ups and downs. And obviously, that's led to a lot of interest from those who want to jump into the space. So that's also an area we've branched into, because FX and crypto, very much complement each other and go hand in hand. So that's what we're, among many things, that's one of the things we're doing now.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for that overview. I mean, it's interesting with the crypto space, because I see there's sort of two sides to it. There's those that want it to be quite an underground movement and unregulated, and then there's those who want to move it into the regulated arena. More as we're sort of going further on, more and more are looking at that second option of becoming a regulated individual or broker in that space.
Sure.
Where's the best place for them to get regulated? What should they be considering when they're thinking about getting regulated? And in particular, I mean, I'm seeing a lot of people in Europe wanting to do this. Is it different in Europe than it is in the rest of the world?
Yep, very good question. I will preface it by saying you can operate as an exchange like a Binance, or you can offer crypto CFDs. Now, if you're just wanting to offer crypto CFDs, the standard FX regulation applies. There are two regions, though, that offer both. Those are Vanuatu and Labuan, Malaysia. So in those areas, you can actually have a licensed exchange with crypto permissions, and you can also run a traditional Forex and CFD broker. The same goes for Labuan, Malaysia. I mean, the specifics about which entity is regulated and what can be offered are a bit much for this discussion, but those are the two ideal areas. If you wanted to do purely crypto, I would go away from Europe for the time being, only because it's kind of a patchwork. It's nothing like the FX world where you have MiFID II guidelines that apply everywhere. Europe is very confusing, and rules in Germany oftentimes will supersede a local regulator like Estonia. That's a popular region, but I would shy away from it until things become a bit more cohesive. On that note, if you wanted a pure exchange license, meaning we're putting aside CFDs, I think places like El Salvador are quite interesting. You can also consider Estonia as well. And then we can go back to what I mentioned with Vanuatu and Malaysia. Those would be at the moment my top choices.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard Estonia mentioned a lot in Europe. They seem to be sort of the forefront of the European regulations. I'm interested to hear what's going on in Asia, and certainly I hadn't really considered South America, but South America does sort of almost act like a standalone region, doesn't it?
Yes. A lot of it has to do with what El Salvador has done as a country. And so
Yeah,
now, obviously, that's moved over. And so they're one of the most crypto friendly places. And I would say, as a starting license, that's probably the best because you can get this license on a relatively low budget. At the moment, the capital is low, the ongoing requirements are quite low. With that said, our experience has shown that changes over time. You know, getting to Estonia, you could also get in there very cheap about 3 or 4 years ago. Since then, though, they've bumped up capital requirements to more or less reflect what we've seen in FX. I mean, I think it's not official, but in the next months, you will need over 100,000
wow.
euros as capital to operate in Estonia. And I would imagine if El Salvador gets adoption, that would be what happens too, as they get flooded with applications. So start to push up the capital to maintain the demand.
So I suppose that moves on to my next question, which is what sort of budgets do people need for getting regulated? And I mean, you've covered the capital requirements of there. So, you know, I think a lot of people go into the crypto space going, oh yes, I can just do this. I've done FX before, or I know a lot about cryptos, and actually becoming a crypto exchange is an easy thing for me to do. But not many have really considered what the costs are involved in setting up a crypto brokerage. I mean, I obviously help on the tech side, on that side, but don't do anything on the regulation side. But yeah, interesting to hear sort of what they should be aware of before they go down that avenue.
Sure. I would say starting at 50,000, I'll just put it in dollars to keep it consistent.
Yeah.
So the minimum you would need is 50,000 for the cheapest option, which cheap doesn't mean low in quality, just the most cost-effective option, which would be El Salvador. And then it goes up from there. Malaysia, for example, has capital requirements that are around 150K USD. Vanuatu, actually, they're asking for $500,000 for crypto. So it varies from region to region, but at a minimum, that's how much you should look for. That doesn't mean, though, that you need that every year. The costs are the highest in the beginning because you have capital, you have application fees. It's always the most expensive in the beginning, but you need a buffer for ongoing costs. I mean, you're always going to need an office, at least one local person, accounting, reporting. These are where the costs start to come into play, and why I think at a minimum this is needed, because I'm not talking about just the setup. The setup alone could be less, but you want to be in business, for more than a couple of months. So you're going to need additional capital to cover all your ongoing expenses.
Sorry, can I pick up on a point there? So if you're doing El Salvador, you would need to have a local person in El Salvador and a registered office there, would you? And how does that look for Vanuatu and Labuan? Because I would have thought Vanuatu, that would be quite difficult.
Sure. So all the places. So in El Salvador, it's pretty basic. You just need one local person. I believe you can even just get by with a registered address. But Vanuatu and Malaysia are more, let's say, mature in the regulations. So Malaysia, you need a physical office, a minimum of 2 local employees. And only recently did Vanuatu ask for this. For years, you could get by without anything. But as of earlier this year, they do require a physical person who actually has to have some certification, meaning you can't just pick someone randomly. They have to have proven they've passed some local exams and understand the market. But these are all things that we can help out with. We have a good enough experience and network that we can find the right individuals.
So I think the moral of this is don't try and do it yourself, because
no, it's
a lot of places you could trip up.
It's just, it's not worth it. You don't save too much in the long run.
No. So one of the questions coming out of that, because obviously talking about local offices, etc. When I started my consultancy business, I was helping startup companies, find the right tech, etc. And I thought, well, yeah, this is easy. I know what everybody needs. And then I hit banking.
Yes.
And then you suddenly realise that actually banking is a big issue, especially getting local bank accounts if you need to have them, etc. What are the banking facilities like for someone in the crypto space? Because it's bad enough in the FX CFD space, and I suspect crypto will be a lot more difficult.
You're right. Your assumptions are correct. The biggest challenge is that banks, going to FX briefly, banks view FX as high risk. They view crypto as even higher. It just is a huge AML issue for their policies, just because of the nature of the industry. So physical banking is really only limited to Vanuatu and Malaysia. You actually can get a bank account set up. Now, to receive client funds, this is going to be a different story, but at least there you could get an operational account. But for the space as a whole, you cannot rely on physical banks. Now, do some major exchanges have them? Yes, but these exchanges have massive balance sheets that in most cases a startup firm doesn't have. I mean, you can always get a bank account somewhere if you bring 20 million to the table, but that's not realistic for all. So EMIs are generally the way to go. Even there, it's a limited space, but with, for example, an Estonia license, I mean, I tell people up front, or El Salvador, local banking, forget about it. However, there are EMIs that will work with you. It's even a risk for them, so it's a lot of KYC and everything, but there are some EMIs that entertain the idea. But the moral of the story is physical banking is just out of the picture for a startup, and most likely it will be that way for some time.
Okay, so you don't need to have a local bank account. It's just as long as you've got an account for the business. It doesn't matter whether you've got an account in El Salvador. You could have an account wherever.
Yes, that's where an EMI can, for, let's say, El Salvador, you could get an EMI and you can use that. Now, even there for retail deposits, it's very much case dependent, but an EMI will let you at least take care of your operating expenses. So if you need to pay salaries, if you need to cover invoices for different services, that's going to be possible. So I'm not saying it's out of the question, but on the retail end, if someone wants to wire over, let's say 1,000 and then have it converted into crypto, this is very difficult just because of the nature of banking. And I often use the analogy, it's like oil and water. I mean, banks and crypto are almost just polar opposites. So it's hard to find a bank that's willing to do that, mostly for it all comes down to risk as far as the bank is concerned. You're a new entity, you're in crypto, they just write it off and they say that's high risk. Not impossible, but it is challenging.
Yeah, interesting. And do you, I mean, I suppose in the FX world, there are unregulated brokers. Do you need to be regulated in the crypto space, or what are the advantages, or can you just be unlicensed and unregulated and just trade?
It's very similar to FX. You can operate an unregulated exchange, but it's going to hurt your reputation. Yeah. I wouldn't want to put a bunch of crypto in an exchange with no oversight. Look what's going on right now in our industry with well-known names. Also, on the marketing side, now a lot of advertisement is prohibited by major, social media sites like Facebook or Google, unless you can prove that you have regulation. So it will at least give you that ability to do marketing and also to separate yourself. I mean, especially now in a time where crypto is under a lot of, we'll say, critique or criticism because of the falling prices, being regulated really helps you stand out, because we've done a complete 360 from everyone throwing their money at crypto. Now everyone is running away. So regulation is a way to help maintain that credibility. Yeah. But to answer your question, could you? In theory, yes, you could, but
there's a lot of disadvantages of doing it. Okay. And I suppose my last question is how do offshore regions handle crypto regulations?
Sure. So it's still kind of emerging. Regions I didn't mention, like Bahamas, for example, they do regulate crypto, but it's very pricey. And a lot of them are just opposed to it. Mauritius, in theory, says they can do it, but I don't know about banking. And so that's where you run into challenges. And then other regions just don't really have a regulatory regime. I'd say it's kind of a mirror of Europe, where it's region dependent. Vanuatu and Malaysia, if you want to throw it into offshore, are the two exceptions to the rule, that they have very clear, defined regulatory frameworks for both. That's why I mentioned them. For the other places, it's kind of a gray area, and it's why I didn't bring them up. So
Yeah.
if you did want offshore, I'd stick with the areas I mentioned. For a last point to make is if a region doesn't, then it could be difficult because offshore regions have been under a lot of scrutiny for money laundering, so they're often now adverse to crypto for that reason.
Yeah. Okay, that's really interesting. Well, thank you very much for coming on the channel.
My pleasure.
Yeah, and hopefully, I'm hoping the viewers will find that very interesting. I think there's a lot of people looking at the crypto space, so I'm kind of hoping that was insightful. I certainly learned from it. So
thank
you
you
very much for today's conversation.
I appreciate it. Thank you for the invitation. Have a good afternoon. We'll speak soon.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.